The snow turned to slush as soon as it hit the streets of Chicago, transforming the city into a wet landscape of mist and fog. Not the ideal weather most people wanted for Christmas, but I didn't care. I heard a lot about how warm it was, how mild it was. To me, it just felt cold, a reflection of what was inside. I stared out the window of my tiny apartment, my eyes unfocused as I watched the snowflakes drift aimlessly by. I was 23 and spent most of my days trying to make something of my art. I had the talent, I knew that much. But talent didn't pay bills, and it certainly didn't fill the emptiness that followed me everywhere I went. My apartment was as small as my bank account, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me, despite the snow falling outside. I'd always dreamed of something bigger, something more than this. But that dream seemed farther away than ever. Most nights I kept to myself, sketching, painting, trying to channel the loneliness into my work. The studio space I had rented was barely big enough for an easel, but it was all I had. I kept telling myself it was enough, that I was doing what I loved. But the truth was, I was lonely. It wasn't just that the apartment was empty, but that I had no one to share it with. No one to make it feel less hollow. I had a few friends, but no one I was close to. The people I had met at art shows and gallery openings were more acquaintances than anything. We'd chat about technique, about trends, about everything and nothing at all. I didn't mind it. I wasn't good at small talk anyway. But there were moments when I'd come home after a long day of pretending to be fine, and I'd feel the weight of silence. That's when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone, so at first I ignored it. The building was old, the walls thin, and it was probably just the neighbor downstairs, or the maintenance guy checking on something. But then the knock came again, this time a little more insistent. I walked over to the door and opened it. No one was there, but at my feet was a package wrapped in plain brown paper. I bent down to pick it up, my fingers brushing the rough surface. There was no return address, no note, just the package. I glanced around. It didn't make sense, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I carried the package inside, setting it down on the small desk where I worked. I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a hardcover sketchpad. It was sleek, almost luxurious, the kind of sketchbook an artist would dream of owning but could never afford. I flipped it open, expecting the usual blank pages, but instead, I found something else. A note. Anything you draw, you can have. I frowned, running my fingers over the elegant handwriting. It looked so simple, so plain, but it sent a chill down my spine. It felt real, like something that couldn't be ignored. I flipped the page, half expecting to find a ridiculous disclaimer or some kind of joke. But there was nothing else. Just the note. I set the sketchpad down on the desk, feeling a strange mix of skepticism and curiosity bubbling up in me. What did this even mean? Was it a prank? A joke? Someone playing a game? I ran my hand over the cover again, the weight of it grounding me. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was something different. I let out a nervous laugh, mostly to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. Magic didn't exist. And yet there I was, staring at this strange gift. I glanced at my easel, the canvas still untouched from earlier. What if it was true? What if I could draw something and it would become real? I picked up my pencil, almost hesitantly at first. Then with a deep breath, I began to sketch. It started simple, a cup of coffee. I didn't want to risk it, not on something complicated. A cup seemed harmless enough. I sketched the outline, then added the details, the curve of the handle, the steam rising in gentle wisps. When I finished, I stared down at the drawing, waiting for something to happen. For a moment, nothing. And then the steam seemed to swirl, and before my eyes the image shimmered. A real coffee cup. I blinked, unable to breathe for a moment as the mug appeared on my desk, warm to the touch, just as it had been in the drawing. My heart raced. This was impossible. But I reached out, hesitantly touching the cup, half expecting it to vanish. But it didn't. It was solid. My mind raced. I stood up, pacing around the desk. What had just happened? Was I hallucinating? But no, the cup was still there. Real. Tangible. I couldn't stop staring at it. This simple, ordinary object that now felt like a symbol of something bigger. Something unknown. I let out a shaky breath, realizing that this was only the beginning. If this was true, if I could create things like this, what else could I bring into existence? What else could I draw? My mind jumped again to something practical. A wool coat. After much detail on every button and getting the lighting just right, there it was. The coat, warm and real, was draped over my chair, as if it had always been there. I reached out to touch it again, just to be sure, my fingers brushing over the thick wool and the smooth lining. It felt too real, like something straight out of a dream. I stood there for a few seconds, my breath shallow, as I ran through every possibility in my head. Magic didn't exist. It couldn't. But here I was, standing in my apartment with a real coat, one I had only just drawn. I let out a shaky breath. The coat had been amazing, but something deep in my gut told me I couldn't stop here. There was something tempting about this new power. If I could create this coat, what else could I bring to life? With a mix of curiosity and excitement, I grabbed the sketch pad again. I needed to test it. This time I drew a wallet, just a simple leather one, nothing too extravagant. I sketched quickly, the pencil moving fluidly across the page as I imagined the texture and feel of the leather. The moment I finished the drawing, I stared at it, waiting for the familiar sense of magic to stir in the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I blinked. There it was, sitting right next to me on the desk, a real leather wallet with a soft texture that seemed to match the one I had drawn. It was exactly as I'd imagined it, like it had simply materialized from the page. I could hardly contain my grin. This was insane, and I couldn't stop now. The possibilities were endless. Next, I sketched a chair. Nothing fancy, just a simple wooden chair with a dark finish, something I could use in my studio. The lines were steady, confident, as if I were already accustomed to this new, bizarre reality. And again, the chair appeared, solid and real, just as it had been drawn. I could feel the weight of it as I ran my fingers along the grain of the wood. The thought that I had created these objects, these items that had never existed outside my mind, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I paused, considering my next move. It had to be something bigger, something more significant, something alive. I looked down at the sketchpad. What if I could create someone real, someone who could fill the empty space I had been living with for years? I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Could I really do it? Could I draw a person? And would they come to life just as these objects had? The thought was insane, but the part of me that had always felt so desperately alone, that part of me wanted it. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I pictured him, tall, confident, with dark hair and eyes that were soft but intense. He was the kind of person who would fill the room with energy, someone who wouldn't just exist in the background of my life, but who would make it feel full, complete. Someone who would finally make me feel seen. I picked up the pencil and began to draw. His face came first, the sharp lines of his jaw, the curve of his lips. I worked slowly, making sure every detail was right, as if he were a sculpture I was carefully chiseling away at. His eyes were intense, the kind of eyes that seemed to see through me, understand me. I drew the outline of his body next, his broad shoulders, his lean but strong frame. I made sure to add a few details to his clothes, making him look casual yet effortlessly stylish, as if he had walked out of a dream. When I finished, I set the pencil down, staring at the page in front of me. There he was, Jason. He wasn't just a face. He wasn't just a figure. He was him. I could almost feel him standing in front of me, waiting to step out of the page. I held my breath. I did it. For the first time since I had started drawing, the room felt charged with energy, like something was about to happen. It felt right. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. This was real. And then, before I could even think, I saw it. His eyes flickered, a small imperceptible shimmer, but it was enough. I gasped. His hand twitched. And then, with a fluid motion, Jason stepped out of the sketch, as if he were unfolding from the page itself. I backed away, my heart racing in my chest. He was real. Jason stood there in front of me, his dark eyes meeting mine with that familiar intensity. He was just as I had imagined him, tall, strong, with the perfect mix of confidence and warmth. His lips curled into a small smile, and I could see the faint trace of amusement in his eyes, as if he knew exactly how surreal this moment was for me. You're real, I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief. He chuckled, a deep, comforting sound. As real as you need me to be. I stood frozen, my mind unable to catch up with what was happening. How was this possible? How was he here? Jason took a step closer to me, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He reached out and lightly touched my arm, sending a jolt through me, as if he were grounding me in reality. You created me, he said. I'm here because you wanted me to be. His words struck me like a wave crashing against the shore. He was right. I had created him, drawn him into existence. He was a manifestation of everything I had been yearning for, someone to make the silence disappear, to fill the empty space that had lingered in my life for far too long. Jason, I whispered, tasting the name on my tongue. It felt so right. He smiled again, and I felt something stir deep within me. Yeah, that's me. Jason didn't say much in the moments after he appeared. He stood there in front of me, letting me absorb the fact that he was real, flesh and blood, right there in my apartment, where he had only existed on a page just moments ago. His presence was overwhelming, like he belonged in this space, like he was exactly what I needed, what I'd been missing, even though I didn't know I was missing anything until I saw him. His eyes never left mine. There was an intensity there, but not the kind that made me feel uncomfortable. No, it was a warmth, a depth, like he understood me in a way that I had never been understood before. You look shocked, he said. You're not sure what to do with me, are you? I couldn't speak at first. What could I say? What was there to say? My thoughts were all jumbled. He wasn't supposed to be here. He couldn't be. I had only drawn him, created him out of thin air. It felt impossible. My voice cracked as I tried to find the right words. I don't understand. How are you here? You're just... I gestured to him helplessly, not even sure how to describe it. You're real. He chuckled softly, his lips curling up at the edges. I'm only as real as you make me, as you need me to be. His words echoed in my mind, and they felt true, but also unsettling. He was real, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how wrong it all was. I had drawn him, sure, but how could I have created him out of nothing? How could he exist like this? And what do you want? From me? Jason stepped closer, his presence filling the room. It wasn't an imposing thing, just the opposite. There was something magnetic about him, something calming. He didn't need to speak to make me feel like he understood me, like he was everything I had wanted without even knowing I had wanted it. He reached out, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. The touch was warm, grounding, and it made my heart race in ways I didn't fully understand. What do I want? He repeated, almost as if he was considering the question himself. I want whatever you want, whatever you need. I'm here for you. There was a pause. The room felt heavier now, as if the air had thickened with something unspoken. My mind raced with possibilities, but one thought lingered in the back of my head. One question I couldn't shake. How much control did I have over him? I had drawn him, yes. But now that he was here, was he really mine? Or had I unleashed something beyond my understanding, beyond my control? But before I could voice that concern, Jason's voice broke through my thoughts again. You've been alone for a long time, haven't you? He said. You've wanted someone like me, someone who could be with you, someone who understands. I flinched at the truth in his words. It was too accurate, too real. He had seen me, in a way no one ever had. The loneliness I'd carried around for years had always been a part of me, gnawing at the edges of my life, even when I'd tried to push it aside. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I have. But it's too much. It doesn't feel right. Jason's eyes softened, but there was something almost playful in his expression now. What if it feels right because it's what you've always needed? I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. He was too perfect. Too perfect. But as I looked at him, something began to shift inside me. The loneliness that had once felt like a weight, a burden I would never escape, started to feel less heavy. Jason was filling the space inside me that had always been empty, and I wasn't sure I wanted him to leave. I reached out almost instinctively, and he met me halfway. His touch was warm, and when our hands brushed, it felt like electricity ran through me. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too, like a connection that went deeper than skin. I felt complete. But then, something inside me stirred. A small voice, distant but persistent, began to whisper. This isn't right. You can't create someone to fill the emptiness inside you. That's not how it works. But when I looked at Jason again, all I could see was the way he smiled at me, like he understood everything I was feeling, like he was the answer to all of my problems. What would happen if I kept drawing, if I kept creating? Would there be more Jasons, more things to fill the spaces that I had always felt were missing in my life? Could I keep building a perfect life, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to want? I didn't know. But I couldn't stop now. Jason wasn't just real, he was the answer. The days passed in a blur after Jason appeared. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so consumed by something, by someone. It was as if my whole world had shifted overnight. Every moment I spent with him felt surreal, like I was living in a dream, but it didn't matter. He was there, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone. We spent hours together. In the mornings, I would wake up to find him in the living room, already there, as if he had been waiting for me. He never asked for anything, never demanded more than I was willing to give. He was perfect, beautiful, understanding. I found myself sketching him more. At first, just little things. The way he held a mug, the way his fingers curled when he played with his phone, the curve of his lips when he smiled. He looked even more real on paper, but it was in the moments when we shared glances, quiet laughs, when his hand brushed mine, that I knew he was everything I had ever wanted. It wasn't just the company. It was him. And the more I drew, the more real he became. Every time I added a new detail, I felt him become more and more alive. There was something in the way his eyes lingered on me, something in the way he watched me that made my heart race. And yet, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling deep in my chest. This wasn't sustainable. The magic wasn't just a gift. It was a dangerous temptation. It wasn't until a few days later that I realized just how much I had begun to depend on him, on Jason, on the life I was creating around him. It happened when I drew something bigger. I hadn't meant to. It wasn't even a conscious decision. I had been sketching, out of habit, out of impulse. And before I knew it, I had drawn a new place. I didn't need it, but I wanted it. Something more. Something beyond what I already had. I had drawn an apartment. A perfect apartment. Spacious, with huge windows that overlooked a city skyline. A cozy living room. A kitchen that felt warm even in the dim light of a winter evening. It was everything I could ever want in a place to live. And then some. I set my pencil down, staring at the drawing, my chest tight with excitement. I knew it would appear. And it did. The room around me shimmered for a moment, and before I could even take a breath, the walls of my apartment shifted. They expanded, the cramped space I had been living in melting away to reveal the vast living room I had just drawn. The floor was smooth, the windows large and framed in soft gray curtains, and everything in its place. It felt like a real home. Jason stood next to me, his hands in his pockets, watching me with a knowing smile. "You wanted more space," he said. "Now you've got it." I ran my hands over the furniture, the new space filling me with a sense of calm I hadn't known I craved. It was beautiful. It was everything. But then the dread crept back in, the creeping feeling that this wasn't the way things were supposed to be. Jason could see it in my face. His expression shifted, a slight furrow in his brow. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping closer. I took a step back, my thoughts spinning. "I don't know. This isn't right. You're real. The apartment's real. But I didn't make this for me, Jason. I made it because I was trying to fill something, trying to fix something inside me." Jason's eyes softened, and he took a gentle step toward me, reaching out to touch my arm. "You're not broken." I shook my head, feeling the weight of his words settle on me like a stone. "But I feel broken. I feel like I'm using this magic, using you, to fix things that aren't supposed to be fixed this way." He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body, his presence as comforting as it was unsettling. "You don't have to be perfect to deserve happiness," he said. "You don't have to have everything in order to feel complete." "I've been lonely for so long," I murmured. "I just wanted someone to fill the space. And now you're here, and I don't know what's real anymore." Jason's gaze never wavered. "You wanted me to be real, and I am. But that doesn't mean you're not real too." I let out a shaky breath, my mind spinning with confusion and guilt. "But I created you. I didn't want to be lonely, and now you're here, and I don't know how to undo it." Jason reached out and cupped my face gently with one hand. "You don't have to undo anything, but you do have to understand that I'm not here to fix you. I'm here because you wanted me, because you wanted someone real. And now that I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." His words should have been comforting, but instead they left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had brought him here. I had created this. But what had I really wanted? I had been lonely, yes, but did I want him? Or had I wanted the idea of someone who could make everything feel okay? I don't know if I'm ready for this," I whispered, stepping away from him. Jason's expression faltered for just a moment, but then he softened. "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be unsure. But don't push me away because you're afraid of what you've created. You don't have to do this alone anymore. I'm here." His words hung in the air, and as much as I wanted to believe him, as much as I wanted to fall into the comfort of his arms and let everything fade away, I couldn't. Something inside me was warning me that this wasn't real in the way I needed it to be. And yet, as I stood there in this beautiful new apartment, with Jason by my side, I couldn't bring myself to let go. I wasn't ready to face what I had done. But maybe in the end, it wasn't just about being ready. It was about facing the consequences of my desires. The apartment was a cage now. It was beautiful, yes. It had everything I could have ever wanted. The high ceilings, the natural light that poured in from the large windows, the cozy living room where I could picture myself spending hours reading or painting. It was perfect. But the perfection started to feel suffocating. I walked around it aimlessly, the luxurious space echoing back my every step, and still, I couldn't shake the gnawing emptiness in my chest. Jason had become more than just a figure of desire or comfort. He had become everything to me. The more I was with him, the more I realized how little I was able to stand on my own anymore. Every time I picked up my sketchbook, the need to draw grew stronger, more consuming. Every time I picked up the pencil, it was as if my hand moved without me, and I found myself adding more. More things I didn't need, more things I didn't understand. I kept drawing him, each time in more detail, each time in different clothes, different poses, different scenarios. But it was never enough. Jason noticed, of course. He always noticed. "You're drawing again," he said one evening, his voice light, but with an edge of concern. He stood in the doorway of my new studio space, his arms crossed. The dim light of the evening sun filtered in through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. "What are you looking for this time?" I set my pencil down slowly, staring at the page in front of me. It was Jason, again. This time, he was sitting in a chair, his face turned slightly to the side, as if deep in thought. But the longer I looked at the sketch, the more I realized it wasn't him anymore. It was a version of him I had created, one that didn't quite capture the real person standing before me. "I don't know," I replied, my voice tight. I thought if I drew more, if I made him more real, maybe it would fill the hole inside of me. Maybe it would make me feel whole." Jason's gaze softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. He walked toward me, taking a seat across from me at the small table. "You don't need to make me more real. I'm already here. I'm here because you wanted me to be." But that was the thing, wasn't it? I had created him because I didn't know how to fill the emptiness that had been inside me for so long. And now that he was here, I didn't know how to stop. "I don't know if I can stop," I confessed, the weight of my own words pressing down on me. "I don't know what to do anymore. I created you, Jason. I made you. And now you're here. And I can't control it. I can't control anything anymore." Jason didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up, walking toward the window, his hands slipping into the pockets of his jacket. The city outside looked peaceful. Too peaceful. But in my mind, everything was chaos. "You're not the only one who's scared," Jason said. "I'm not here because I'm perfect. I'm not here because I'm the solution to your problems. I'm here because you wanted someone to be here with you. But that doesn't mean everything will be easy. This isn't easy." His words stung, but I knew they were true. I had used him, created him, to fill the emptiness inside of me, and now I was terrified of the consequences. I was terrified that the magic I had brought into my life would slip through my fingers, or worse, that it would swallow me whole. "I thought it would be enough," I whispered, my throat tight. "I thought if I made you real enough, if I made everything perfect, I wouldn't feel so alone anymore. But now..." I looked up at him, the tears finally spilling over. "Now I don't know who I am without you. I don't know what's real and what's not." Jason turned back toward me, his face unreadable for a moment. Then slowly, he walked toward me again, his steps deliberate, his presence grounding. "You have to figure that out," he said. "I can't give you that. I can't fix you. But I'm here. And that's all I can offer." It wasn't enough. I wanted more. I wanted control over the life I had drawn, over the world I had shaped around me. But the more I looked at Jason, the more I realized the truth. He wasn't mine to control. He was his own person, his own being. I had created him, yes, but that didn't mean I could bend him to my will. And if I kept pushing, if I kept trying to perfect him, I would lose everything I had created in the first place. For the first time since Jason appeared, I understood the danger of what I had done. But understanding wasn't enough. "Jason, I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice shaky. "I didn't mean for this to go so far. I didn't mean to make you feel like you had to be everything for me." Jason didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, watching me with a calmness that almost broke me. I had drawn him into existence, but now I saw the flaw in my thinking. I had been trying to force something perfect, trying to fill the space with something that would never be able to fix what was broken inside me. I took a deep breath. I think I've gone too far. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. I need to figure out who I am, without drawing you into every part of my life." Jason finally nodded. "I understand. You don't need to fix me. Just fix yourself." The weight of his words hung in the air between us, heavy and real. And for the first time, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something bigger than the magic I had created, something real. But the question was, Could I live with the consequences of my own desires? Could I live without needing to draw the perfect life? It was strange how quiet the apartment felt now, almost suffocating in its silence. I hadn't touched my sketchbook in days. The apartment was still as beautiful as it had been when I'd drawn it into existence for Jason, but something had shifted. The excitement I had once felt about our new life together had dulled into something less tangible, like a dream fading away at the edge of morning light. I walked around the space, running my fingers along the edges of the furniture, but everything felt more distant now. Jason had become so real, so present, that I couldn't deny how much I had grown attached to him. The life I had created for him, for both of us, had started to feel too small for what we'd built. But was it really about the space anymore? Or was it about the distance I'd created between myself and everything else in the world? I picked up my sketchbook again. It felt heavier this time, like it carried the weight of everything I had tried to draw into being. The comfort of the pencil in my hand, the feeling of shaping reality with a few simple strokes. Suddenly, it all felt like a crutch, a way to avoid the truth. I needed to fix things, but not in the way I thought. I needed to create something real. So I started with Jason again. I drew him the way I thought he should be, the way I thought he deserved to be. This time, it wasn't just about making him happy in this apartment. It was about giving him the life I thought he wanted. I drew him in a new setting, no longer the apartment we shared. I gave him a house of his own, a life outside of me. His own space, filled with things I could never give him, with possibilities I couldn't create. I drew him with other people, friends, laughter, a life that wasn't connected to me, a life where he could truly be his own. In the drawing, Jason was laughing, surrounded by friends, sitting in a bright, airy room. There were paintings on the walls, a large wooden table in the center where they were all gathered for dinner. His eyes were sparkling, alive with a happiness that I had created but couldn't sustain. It was a life so full of joy, so full of warmth and connection, that it almost hurt to look at. But the longer I stared at the drawing, the more I realized something I hadn't before. I had created the perfect life for him, but I had also drawn a perfect separation between us. I had given him everything I thought he needed, everything I couldn't give him in this small apartment, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't what he wanted. It wasn't what I wanted either. I set the sketchbook down, my heart heavy with something I couldn't quite place. Jason had become everything I had dreamed of, someone to fill the empty spaces in my life. But the more I created for him, the more I realized I was erasing myself from the picture. I had drawn him into the perfect life, but in doing so, I had drawn myself out of it. I wasn't sure when it happened, but I knew now. I had created a perfect life for Jason, but I hadn't created anything real for myself. And that realization hit harder than anything else had. I thought I was giving him the world, but in truth, I was giving him my escape from the world. I had drawn him into this existence, but it wasn't his. It was mine. It was everything I wanted him to be, everything I wanted him to have, but not who he really was. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep drawing my desires onto the page and pretending they were real. I picked up my pencil one last time, my hand trembling. I knew what I had to do. I needed to draw something for myself, something I had never given myself before. I drew myself, but it wasn't the picture I had imagined. It wasn't me surrounded by the perfect life or the perfect people. It was just me, alone, sitting on the couch in the apartment I had lived in before everything changed. My apartment was simple, sparse. A few books on a shelf, an old lamp by the window. There was nothing extravagant, nothing perfect. But there was something in that simplicity that I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time in a long while, I felt content. I drew myself smiling, a small, quiet smile. Not a smile of someone who had everything, but a smile of someone who had found peace in what they had. A person who was content in the life they had built, even if it was imperfect, even if it was lonely. As I finished the drawing, I felt a strange release. I had spent so long trying to perfect everything around me, trying to create a world where I wasn't lonely, where everything was just right. But in the end, it was the quiet moments, the imperfect moments, that had brought me peace. I put the pencil down, finally feeling the weight of everything I had learned. Jason had been a gift, a beautiful, fleeting creation, but he was never meant to fill the gaps inside of me. And now, with a quiet acceptance in my chest, I understood that the life I had been searching for wasn't going to be found in perfection. It was going to be found in embracing the mess, in embracing the flaws, in letting myself be human. I took a deep breath, looking at the two drawings side by side, the one of Jason, surrounded by everything I had given him, and the one of me, content with the simple life I had once had. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. As for Jason, I knew now what he needed wasn't a perfect life or a perfect world. It was freedom. Freedom to live his own story, to find his own happiness. I couldn't control him. I couldn't control the life I had drawn for him. I had to let him go. And as I closed the sketchbook, I finally understood that it was time for me to let go too. I was going to start living my life, the imperfect one. And that was enough.